Summary of Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Peter Cuomo. Overview. Maggie O'Farrell, an Irish-British novelist, wrote Hamnet, a historical fiction novel, in 2020. It fictionalizes William Shakespeare's family's existence between the death of his son Hamnet in 1596 and the composition of Hamlet about 1600. Hamnet was named the winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2020, a major literary prize in the United Kingdom. Summary. The novel alternates between two storylines. The first recounts the circumstances leading up to Hamnet's death in 1596, while the second recounts the events leading up to Hamnet's birth. The tale begins with Hamnet, 11, learning that his twin sister, Judith, is sick with a fever and buboes, or egg-shaped bulges beneath her skin. He looks for the doctor and his mother Agnes, who is a healer, but they are both gone. While his father, a playwright, is abroad in London, his grandparents are too preoccupied. When Agnes and the doctor arrive, the doctor believes Judith will pass away. Agnes, a more effective healer than the physician, tries all of the medicines she knows to help her daughter. The family is ignorant that Judith's illness was caused by a remote encounter between a Venetian glass dealer and a flea that fell from a monkey's back in Alexandria, Egypt. Hamnet is displaying signs of sickness as well, but no one notices. Hamnet forms a contract with death because he can't take the notion of his twin dying while he lives. He changes into Judith's clothing and promises to be death's next victim. When Agnes awakens, she discovers that the dying twin is Hamnet, not Judith. She won't be able to help him at all. The meeting of Hamnet's parents opens the novel's second storyline. His father is a Latin instructor and the son of a shady glovemaker, while his mother is the daughter of a deceased yeoman and a healer who lives in the woods. Agnes' mother is deceased by the time she meets the Latin instructor, and she is working for her stepmother Joan, who is terrified by Agnes' psychic and healing skills. When Joan protests the Latin tutor's marriage to Agnes, the two have sex. Their relationship culminates in a pregnancy and a hasty marriage, which John, the Latin tutor's father, prefers since it reduces his obligation to the yeoman who died. Agnes moves to Stratford to live with her Latin tutor and his family. She gives birth to her first child, Susanna, in the wilderness, following the advice of her deceased mother. Agnes develops a reputation for her healing abilities over time. When Agnes is expecting her second child, however, she is worried by her inability to predict the kid's gender as well as her husband's restlessness and despair. She has a feeling he needs to leave the confines of Stratford and travel to London. Agnes had intended to accompany him there once she gave birth. Agnes is terrified when she gives birth to twins, Hamnet and Judith, since she has a psychic sensation that she was only intended to have 2 children, not 3. She decides to defy fate and safeguard the lives of all 3 of her children. Agnes believes that London will kill Judith and that they should stay in Stratford since she is a delicate youngster. Following that, the children grow apart from their father, who becomes a renowned writer. The novel's last section depicts the aftermath of Hamnet's death. While Agnes grieves over her son at home, her husband feels compelled to seek solace in London. Even though he still travels home on occasion and purchases a larger home for his wife and remaining girls, he becomes increasingly estranged from them and unfaithful to Agnes. Agnes is shocked a few years later when she learns that he created a play with their dead son's name on it. When she insists on seeing the performance, she discovers that it is her husband's way of reviving Hamnet and comforting himself over the death of a child. Historical note. Hamnet and Judith, twins, were born in the 1580s to a couple in Stratford, England. The male twin, Hamnet, died in 1596. According to Stratford archives, his father composed a play named Hamlet, which is interchangeable with Hamnet, for years later. Chapter 1. Hamnet and his universe are introduced in the first chapter. Hamnet is a bright, inquisitive young man who lives with his mother and 2 sisters in a house adjacent to his grandparents. His grandpa runs a glove factory, while his father works in London, a city Hamnet has never seen. Hamnet seeks for the grown-ups in his family at the start of the tale in order to tell them that his twin sister, Judith, is ill. He discovers his grandfather, John, at a quiet time, drinking in the main home. Since he was shamed and lost his prior high status in the community, John has been drinking alone. John lashes out at Hamnet, hitting him with the rim of a cup below the brow. Hamnet walks upstairs to see Judith, his twin sister, who is unwell in bed with a pair of quail's eggs under her skin, 15. He informs her that he is going to look for a doctor. Agnes, the twins' mother, is in her garden near the woodland at Hewlands. She anticipates danger after noticing that the bees have been disturbed. She later regrets thinking that if she had come home immediately, she might have headed off what was coming, 17. Hamnet comes to the doctor's residence. There, he meets the doctor's wife, who diagnoses Judith's lumps as buboes, an alarming phrase that Hamnet understands. The doctor will be sent to their home, according to the wife. Meanwhile, Judith, who is bedridden, has a fever dream. She tries to keep her elder sister Susanna's hand in it, but it slips from her grasp, and she is about to fall into the grass. She then has a dream that she is riding on her father's shoulders, and she is afraid that she will fall off and become embroiled in a stench-filled street battle. She is so bewildered when she wakes up that she has no idea how she got into the bed. Hamnet's father is in Bishopsgate, London, where he indulges in a griddle cake despite his normal austerity. Hamnet re-enters the home and calls out to see if anyone is present to meet him and give assistance. Chapter 2. Around 1581, John sent Hamnet's father to Hewlands to educate the sons of a deceased yeoman to whom John owes a debt. Authoritarian John, who insists on tutoring the boys twice a week, has a tense relationship with Hamnet's father. Tutoring is boring for Hamnet's father until he sees a young woman carrying a bird. Following the lesson, Hamnet's father goes in search of the child, learning that she is the daughter of the deceased yeoman and a lady who is supposed to be a gypsy or sorcerer. The daughter is known for roaming around and gathering unusual flora to make dubious potions, 32. She is considered too wild for any guy, yet she catches Hamnet's father's interest fully. Hamnet's father requests to see the woman's bird when they meet. She leads him to storage, where she shows him her kestrel bird. He reaches out to the woman, pleading with her to give him her name. She pretends to be and while grabbing the skin between his thumb and fingers in a painful and stimulating manner. It's as though she's attempting to deduce something about him. She kisses him and reveals her true identity as Agnes. She disappears, leaving him alone and perplexed. The following section of the chapter tells the story of Agnes' mother, Rowan, who was a woodland girl. Agnes' father, a yeoman, fell in love with the woodland inhabitant and married her. She was especially loyal to Agnes, whom she carried everywhere with her when she had children. The mother dies in delivery when she had her third kid. Her widower marries Joan, a hard-working lady who bears him 6 children and who is terrified of Agnes. Agnes is cursing Joan from Joan's perspective. Joan, on the other hand, is the invader who assigns Agnes the most difficult tasks. Rowan and Agnes' unconditional love is still fresh in Agnes' mind. Agnes witnesses her father exhuming her mother's remains as a priest conducts a mystic ceremony over it one day. Agnes' father warns her not to tell anybody about what she witnessed. Agnes no longer believes in God after this. Agnes gets captivated with human hands as she attempts to feel the muscle between the thumb and forefinger, drawn always to touch them, to feel them in hers, 48. She uses this method to discover the essence of every person she encounters. Joan and Agnes' father is concerned about Agnes' talent, believing it to be unchristian, and advise her to hide this strange gift, 49. Agnes, unable to fit in, longs to be loved for who she is, pledging to pursue that love when she finds it. Chapter 3. When Hamnet returns home, he discovers that his mother is missing and that his sister has deteriorated. He feels bad about himself for failing to locate someone who can help his sister. Susanna, his older sister, enters and slumps on a chair, lamenting the loss of both her parents. Susanna, who is nearly 14 years old, resents the public's fascination with her mother's healing abilities. Susanna believes Agnes is always besieged by strangers seeking her assistance. Susanna's father, on the other hand, only visits her 5 times a year. He writes letters to them, which Hamnet, the family's most educated member, reads to the rest of the family. Susanna's reverie is interrupted by grandmother Mary, who demands that Susanna assist her with supper because the twins had neglected their responsibilities. Chapter 4. Eliza, the Latin tutor's sister, discovers him in the attic mooning. She informs him that she is aware he and Agnes had been out for a stroll. Eliza cautions him that their father owes the deceased yeoman money and would not approve of the match. Later, in the apple barn, Agnes and the Latin professor make love. She had entire faith in him, especially after she put his hand in hers and discovered a multifaceted individual with layers and strata, like a landscape. 69. She recalls running into Joan the last time they went on a stroll together, and Joan telling her that she would never approve of Agnes marrying the son of a guy who owed them money. Joan threatens to evict Agnes if she finds out she is pregnant with the Latin tutor's kid. Bartholomew, Agnes' biological brother, and the farm's legal heir insist he will not allow it. Joan is eager to get rid of Agnes and humiliate her, especially because she looks like her mother, whose hair was discovered in the yeoman's pocket after he was buried. When Agnes arrives at the Latin tutor's house, he is taken aback by her pregnancy but anxious to marry her. While fantasizing about a life free of his father, John intends to exploit the unwed pregnancy and eventual marriage as leverage to pay off the debts he and Agnes's deceased father owe each other. Chapter 5. Hamnet, who is sleeping alongside Judith, is startled awake. He has a swollen tongue and an ache at the back of his head, and he is ill. When Agnes arrives home, the twins are nowhere to be seen. She then notices Hamnet, who is pallid and clings to the stair rail. He informs her that she must attend to Judith. Chapter 6. Eliza expresses her desire to construct Agnes' wedding crown. Agnes and the Latin instructor are to be married by a priest Agnes knows a long way from town. Eliza discovers that Agnes has clairvoyant abilities and can send messages from her deceased sister, and, as she gets to know her future sister-in-law. The couple's family is present for the ceremony. If Agnes' parents were still living, she imagines where they would sit. A handful of rowan berries fall from a branch and settle on Agnes' shoulder when she pleads for a sign that her mother, Rowan, is nearby. Bartholomew pleads with his Latin tutor to look after his sister. Historical Note Chapter 6 Analysis. The novel's first portion contrasts chapters depicting events leading up to Hamnet's illness with chapters depicting events after his parents' engagement and marriage. As she follows the thoughts of the various persons she shadows, Farrell utilizes a third-person intimate viewpoint. Her use of the present tense adds a feeling of urgency to the proceedings as if Hamnet's goal to save Judith is running out of time. In the first several chapters, Agnes is a major character. Hamnet, upon learning that his twin Judith is ill, longs for his mother and expects her to come at any time in the first chapter. Her debut before Hamnet, on the other hand, is postponed until the 5th chapter. Instead, the reader encounters Agnes in Hewlands, where she looks after her bees, and subsequently, in the 2nd to 4th chapters, as the wild, independent-minded young girl she was before her marriage. Agnes has a free spirit and inventive creativity to rival her more renowned husband, thanks to O'Farrell's evocative portrait of her as a healer and countrywoman. Agnes' passion for her healing profession is exemplified by Susanna's melancholy observation that Agnes isn't just mother to her, but mother to the whole town, the entire country. 54. Agnes' practical, perceptive art has more currency in Stratford at this point in the story than her husband's airy illusions. O'Farrell's decision to keep Agnes' husband unnamed emphasizes Agnes' emergence as the more important and confident parent at this point in the story. To his pupils and in-laws who are hesitant to accept him home, he is the Latin tutor, and to his 3 children, he is an absent father. Finally, the title character Hamnet plays an important role in the first portion. Readers see him at his most promising, as a bright but creative boy with a tendency to slip the bonds of the real, tangible world around him and enter another place. 8. The theatrical character Hamlet's predisposition to be a thinker is foreshadowed by Hamnet's dreaminess and tendency to be absent-minded. Still, when O'Farrell depicts him interacting with his severe grandparents, his delicate, sympathetic twin Judith, and his parents' absences, he becomes the epitome of a vivacious little boy whom the reader will miss. Although Judith looks to be the one who is ill, O'Farrell also leaves hints that Hamnet may fall ill. She depicts Hamnet as stock-still, his face white, his fingers gripping the stair rail in a horrifying image. 91. The reader is given an alarming sense that, while the individuals are preoccupied with Judith's illness, the narrative is not. Chapter 7. Agnes examines Judith with Hamnet's help and discovers that she has the plague. Agnes is chastised by Hamnet for not getting home sooner. While Agnes is secretly guilt-ridden and afraid, the medicine woman in her rises to the occasion, attempting to construct a poultice to lower the fever. Mary, Agnes's empathetic mother-in-law, who lost her daughter and to the plague, joins Agnes in saving Judith. Susanna and Mary both notice that Hamnet is unusually pale, and the picture will haunt them after he dies. Chapter 8. Agnes is struck by the contrast between her childhood home in the countryside and the city house she shares with her husband and his family on her wedding night. In a house that slopes like Agnes' first initial, the letter A, the newlyweds have the attic room. Her kestrel is currently in the care of the priest who married them. Agnes rapidly learns the ins and outs of the household, even personalizing candlewick trimming and bread preparation. She notes that her husband's relationship with his father is strained and that he appears split in two, calm in their apartment but irritable and protective at home. 122. Chapter 9. When Hamnet opens the door, he is confronted by the horrifying figure of the physician, who is dressed in a dark robe and wearing a hideous featureless mask, pointed like a gigantic bird's beak. 124. The physician's disguise is said to keep him safe from the plague. As rival medical practitioners, the physician and Agnes have little regard for one another. Hamnet even gets the impression that the doctor wants his mother to be sick. Meanwhile, she dismisses both the doctor's dried toad treatment and his pessimism about Judith's chances of recovery. Chapter 10. Agnes is considerably pregnant in the spring of 1583. Her spouse is concerned for her safety because many women die during childbirth. Agnes, on the other hand, gets a premonition that everything will turn out okay and that she would have 2 healthy children. Agnes wakes up one morning to discover that she has had a dream about her mother, Rowan. Rowan tells Agnes in his dream that the forest branches are so dense you can't feel the rain. 128. Agnes interprets this, along with her labor symptoms, as a sign that she should visit the woodland near Hewlands. She gives birth to her daughter in the woods by herself. Meanwhile, her husband is taken aback by Agnes' absence and her scrawled letter about branches and a forest, as he wants to move away from his parents when the baby is born. He approaches Agnes' brother, Bartholomew, who leads him into the forest to find her. Chapter 11. This chapter explains how Judith became infected with the plague. Her disease was caused by 2 independent occurrences that occurred in different places of the world. The first is a Venetian master glassmaker who specializes in millefiori beads who singes off 2 of his fingers by accident. One of his co-workers prepares the beads for sale by packaging them in a box. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, an Isle of Man cabin boy is tasked with purchasing groceries for the ship and befriends a monkey. The monkey's venomous flea climbs onto the youngster, who then brings it on board the ship. The ship is wreaked havoc by this flea, which kills crew people and pets. When cats die, the rat population grows, which spreads the plague. Despite this, the ship's captain is adamant about continuing to sell his commodities and generate money. They steal the glassmaker's beads in Venice, and the fleas penetrate the bead supplies. Before the ship lands in London, there are additional human and feline casualties. A courier, who is beginning to show symptoms of the plague, distributes the flea-infested beads to various outposts around the nation. A package is sent to Judith's seamstress neighbor in Stratford. The seamstress gives Judith the privilege of unwrapping the beads since she knows how excited she was to receive them. Chapter 12. Agnes detects that she is pregnant with a kid whose sex she cannot discern when Susanna is 1 year old. Agnes' delight is blighted, however, by her husband's ill temper, which hangs around her like a nasty stink. His insomnia, excessive drinking, and appearance of bad health give her reason to be concerned. She has a feeling that his depression stems from living with his strict father. Agnes seeks guidance from her brother Bartholomew. Bartholomew believes Agnes' husband is all head, with not much sense, and that if he is not employed, he will go nuts. 160. He offers to look for John at the bar and recommends that the eldest son travel to London, maybe to grow the glove company. Agnes anticipates that her husband will travel to London first, followed by her and the children when she gives birth. Chapters 7 to 12. These middle chapters, which alternate between the events leading up to Hamnet's death and the events following his parents' reunion, are dominated by themes of sickness, healing, and convalescence. The omniscient narrative of Chapter 11 leaves the lives of the Stratford characters behind, revealing the plague's deep and wide destiny. Farrell brings the concept of randomness and chance to a tale otherwise dominated by Agnes's foresight and intuition by suggesting that the culprit of the Stratford family's difficulties is a little flea on a monkey in faraway Alexandria, Egypt. The physician and Agnes' countryside treatments fashioned from local flora and animals are ineffective against this plague because it is an Afric fever, 145, which is spread to other regions of the earth. After Agnes' wedding, chance and randomness play a role in her life. When she gives birth, she is still guided by instinct and a feeling of benign foreboding, as she got from her mother in a dream. Her instincts also allow her to challenge the doctor in coming up with remedies that outshine his own. She's perplexed, though, when she can't figure out the gender of her second kid or come up with a home remedy for her husband's melancholy. 156. She knows that his poisoned mental condition can only be healed if he is allowed to leave here and travel to the city, where he may properly mature away from his father. The limits of Agnes' foresight, like the disease, underscore the local and localized character of her knowledge. This foreshadows the enormous shock of Hamnet's death in the novel's later chapters. Chapter 13. As Judith's illness worsens, Agnes and Mary are by her bedside. Mary, who has already lost 3 kids, is prepared for the worst. She gives Eliza permission to write to the child's father, requesting that he return from London, as Judith is likely to die soon. Hamnet wakes up aching and hurting all over. He goes to Judith's bedside, where the entire family is fast sleeping. He notices that Judith is staring at him and that she is looking much worse. He begs her to get better and wishes he could take her place in death. He believes it is possible to hoodwink death, to pull off the trick he and Judith have been playing on people since they were children, to exchange places and clothes, leading people to believe each was the other since they look so similar. 168. He swears that death will take him instead of Judith and that she shall live while he dies. Chapter 14. Mary is enraged that her son will be traveling to London. She is confident that he will suffer some damage as a result of his inattention. Mary is especially enraged with Agnes since she refused to take her side. Now, more than ever, Mary regards Agnes as a forest dweller who seduced her son. Meanwhile, Agnes is significantly pregnant with what she assumes is a single kid of unknown sex. She does not wish to hold her husband against his will, despite her reluctance to let him leave. Despite his eagerness to get started, he pledges that as soon as he is comfortable, he would send for Agnes, Susanna, and the new baby. Chapter 15. Eliza's letter to her brother is delivered to a lad, who takes it to the postal inn. The innkeeper subsequently sends it over to a trader who is traveling to Banbury. Because of the epidemic, the theatres in London are closed to prevent enormous crowds from forming. Eliza's brother is in Kent. People in Kent, on the other hand, are still allowed to congregate. The letter passes through multiple hands before reaching Eliza's brother, who is preoccupied at the time with urging his colleagues to put on an excellent show despite the lower stage dimensions. He is horrified when he gets the letter and learns that his daughter is unwell, and he is determined to go to Stratford as soon as possible. Chapter 16. Agnes starts having labor pains a month before she plans to give birth. Mary catches up with her as she tries to give birth in the jungle and prevents her from doing so. She thinks of the letter her husband sent from London, which she had Eliza read to her twice throughout the labor. Agnes notices something in the way he has written. The long passage about these gloves for the players that signifies some alteration in her husband, who claims he was providing performers from the stage with gloves, 188. Aside from the family, he appears happier, more energetic, and more like himself. Agnes gets a nagging feeling that her spouse is far away, and she has a dreadful feeling. Agnes gives birth to a boy with the help of Mary and the midwife. The midwife then gets an inkling that Agnes is expecting a second child. The next baby is a girl, and her umbilical cord is wrapped around her neck when she is delivered. Even though they believe the baby is dead, she is finally resurrected. Judith is a fragile child who is half the size of her brother Hamnet. Agnes has plans to relocate the family to London to be with her husband, but she keeps putting them off to preserve Judith's life. Agnes works hard to push back, fight against, undo the foresight she always had about having 2 children and resolves to do everything she can to keep them safe. 202. Agnes and the kids do not relocate to London, and the husband remains estranged from his family. Chapter 17. When Agnes wakes up at Judith's bedside, she notices that Judith and Hamnet appear to have changed bodies and clothes. The healthy one is Judith dressed as Hamnet, whereas Hamnet dressed as Judith is very ill. Agnes believes that fate has played a joke on her and that she should have been treating Hamnet instead of Judith. On Hamnet, none of her remedies work. Meanwhile, Hamnet imagines a snowy scene and prepares to rest. He is surrounded by his bereaved mother, sisters, and grandma as he passes away. Chapters 13 to 17 Analysis. The third half of the work, which continues to alternate between the tales of the events leading up to Hamnet's death and those following his parents' meeting, is dominated by themes of doubling, scarcity, and moving locales. Agnes holds on to the belief that she would only have one more child, totaling 2 children rather than 3 until she gives birth to twins. She was positive her first child would be a girl, but she is receiving no definite signs with her second pregnancy. 178. A knife facing toward the fire, dry and crackling, and female pheasant hair indicate a girl, whereas the crisp flavor of an apple, soft skin, and a male peewit indicate a boy, according to her beliefs. Agnes' inability to conceive opposite-sex twins before they arrive, despite the immense size of her tummy, feeds into Hamnet's subsequent belief that there is not enough life, enough air, enough blood for both of them. Maybe there was never 1 inch. 169. The idea of a mother's womb that isn't designed to handle more than one life conjures up images of a womb that isn't equipped to handle more than one life. While Judith, who has been feeble since birth and is prone to illness, was thought to be the twin with the weaker grip on life, Hamnet proves to be the true victim in the end. The combined indications of Hamnet's horrible aspect and his incredible compassion in handing over his life to his brother demonstrate O'Farrell's weakness. Hamnet's behavior goes against patriarchal traditions in his community, which state that a man's life is more precious than his sister's. The mystery surrounding the lethal disease leaving Judith's body and entering Hamnet's is heightened by the slumber that follows Hamnet and Judith's switch of garments, which also engulfs previously vigilant Agnes. The slumber, which paralyzes the human players and mocks their attention, serves as a metaphor for their impotence in the face of death. In this segment, Agnes loses her sense of security, while her formerly wandering husband gains power and prominence as a result of his developing profession as a writer in London. Agnes' reaction when she gets her husband's joyful letter in Chapter 16 is key. While her husband has found his tribe and is climbing the corporate ladder, Agnes, who is about to give birth, has her authority stripped from her when her mother-in-law insists on giving birth the conventional manner, rather than in the wilderness, as she had intended. Chapter 18. Agnes is preparing Hamnet's body for burial. She prepares a winding sheet for him with Mary's help. Agnes is saddened when she has to inform Judith that her twin will never return, while Judith weeps. When the husband arrives in Stratford, he is startled to learn that Judith has survived and that Hamnet has died. He carries his son's weight at the burial and lowers him into the dirt at his riverfront cemetery. Agnes is enraged with her husband for not being present because the family is in mourning. Despite his grief at his son's death, he desires to return to the London playhouse and his company. Agnes, puzzled, insists on his staying and accuses him of being captured by the place in your head, the imaginary region that is more real to him than any real-life location. 240. He departs, stating that he intends to return before Christmas. Agnes neglects her usual tasks and medical job due to her anguish at her husband's absence. Her husband's letters get shorter and sloppier, and he delays his return for a year. He chooses to remain in London since working on his playhouse allows him to momentarily forget about his family's tragedy. Agnes detects that he has been with other women when he returns. Despite their painful reunion, he begs Agnes to relocate the family to London. Because of Judith's health, Agnes refuses. Her husband then shocks her by persuading Bartholomew to purchase a large property in Stratford for the family. Susanna is in charge of practical affairs while Agnes and her girls settle into their new home. The midwife who delivered the twins comes by one night and tells Judith that she sees Hamnet running between the doors of the new big home and the tiny one where he was born. Judith preserves this information because she sees it as a link to her twin. She goes out late at night seeking Hamnet and claims to be able to hear another's breathing beneath her own on one occasion. 283. She feels as though she has lost her sibling all over again after the moment has passed. Joan visits the family and informs them that Agnes' husband has written a play with the same name as their deceased son. Susanna sends a furious letter to her father, while Agnes retires to her bed. Agnes and Bartholomew travel to London to witness the play, eager to learn more about its plot. When Agnes finds that the play she anticipated to be about their kid is set in a remote Danish castle, she is furious. She believes her spouse has been lost in the theater's artificiality. She is deeply touched, however, when she meets the kid Hamlet, who has a similar resemblance to her son. She understands that her husband brought him back to life, the only way he knows how. 304. Note from the author. According to Farrell, the novel is a work of idle speculation regarding Hamnet's death. 308. She claims that the cause of Hamnet's illness is unclear, and while she improvises on the plague theme, it may have been something altogether else. Although most people remember Anne Hathaway as Shakespeare's wife, her father Richard called her Agnes in his bequest, which O'Farrell favors. Similarly, historians disagree on whether Joan Hathaway was Agnes' real mother. O'Farrell chose to portray her as a stepmother. Chapter 18. Author's note analysis. The extended last chapter, set in the aftermath of Hamnet's death, shows how each family member copes with his loss in their way. Agnes lets sadness dictate her life, clinging to the Stratford village where Hamnet lived and died. She is troubled by him for months and seeks out his presence. As a result, she neglects all other aspects of her life, including her looks, domestic tasks, and medical job, despite her concern for the survival of her surviving children. While Susanna is irritated by her mother's inability to adjust and keep up appearances, Judith is obsessed with finding her twin and attempting to be plagued by him. Each member of the family despises the husband's coping technique, which is to hold himself apart to survive by retreating to London and the theater. 255. When he is disloyal to Agnes, he causes his estrangement to be more pronounced. Despite his deliberate distancing, he can't help but feel sad whenever he meets a youngster Hamnet's age or one who reminds him of who Hamnet may have been if he had lived. On a deeper level, he channels these emotions into the play that carries his son's name and was the basis for O'Farrell's novel. Although Agnes and her husband live in distinct worlds, their worlds intersect and inform one another. First, Agnes' husband's prosperity allows him to purchase a large house in Stratford for the family. The home becomes a matriarchy, with Judith raising a colony of cats and a disheveled Agnes roaming her ambling garden. Second, during the performance, Agnes enters her husband's world and tries to comprehend what he has done with their son's memories. Her motion of extending a hand, as if wishing to pierce the boundary between audience and players, between real life and play, suggests that she has accepted her husband's way of keeping their kid alive and is inspired by his goal. 306. Character analysis. Agnes. Except for the 11th chapter, which describes the plague's trajectory, Agnes, Hamnet's mother, is at the focus of O'Farrell's story. While Anne Hathaway was Shakespeare's wife's given name, O'Farrell used the name Agnes, which was recorded in Hathaway's father's will. Joan Hathaway was made Agnes' stepmother by O'Farrell to give Rowan, a fairy-like lady who grew up in the forest, a more peculiar parental influence. Agnes has a kestrel, a powerful and secretive bird of prey, on her shoulder, demonstrating the otherworldly character she got from her mother. She abandons her marriage to the Latin tutor in exchange for a more metropolitan lifestyle. She has an unsettling, wrong sort of beauty and is tall and pallid. 174. Her black hair doesn't match her golden green eyes, and her teeth are equally spaced but pointed, like a fox's. 174. Agnes's appearance is a suitable counterpoint to her dual character. She is a faithful wife and mother, but she is also a healer with a witch garden of medicinal plants and bees that she attends to without a veil. 15. She's also unusual in her capacity to sense the essence of a person's character by feeling the muscle between their thumb and fingers, as well as her foresight on birth and death. People flock to Agnes for remedies they can't get from the doctor, and she plays a vital role in the community. Her actions provide a realistic, earthy counterpart to her husband's intellectually creative ones. While Agnes begins as a self-assured and independent young lady who defies her stepmother Joan and mother-in-law Mary's expectations, she is overcome by the prospect of having 2 rather than 3 children at her grave. She's also preoccupied with her cerebral husband's happiness in a world she doesn't comprehend. She holds herself responsible for Hamnet's death since she failed to see the signals of disease, and she resents the fact that her husband is free to flee the scene of their grief. She begins the story as a forward-thinking heroine, but by the conclusion, she has become a countrywoman. Like a farmer's daughter, traipsing about the lanes and fields, gathering weeds in a basket, her skirts wet and filthy, her cheeks flushed and sunburned, she says. 278. Agnes retreats to her rural roots due to her grief over her son and uncertainty about her husband's distance. Agnes' husband / the Latin tutor. The Latin instructor, the oldest son of a glovemaker who subsequently becomes Agnes' husband, is William Shakespeare, as O'Farrell's readers would recognize him. However, that well-known name is never mentioned in the text. This is most certainly an intentional move on O'Farrell's side. She wants to portray the great writer as a guy who was marginalized by his autocratic father and regionally famous wife in contemporary Stratford. This daydreaming, melancholy elementary school student, who is all head, no sense, is suffocated by his critical, dictatorial Father John. 160. Agnes notices that he has a wide landscape in his core that he must be able to completely inhabit to prevent harmful conduct. 69. When Agnes and the family she creates prove insufficient, the Latin professor turns to London for help. He finds the ideal outlet for his creativity in the playhouse. He begins to live a double life from the moment of his escape to London. In Stratford, he is a well-known family guy, but in London, he becomes a well-known writer. After Hamnet's death, the former Latin tutor is imprinted by London life, and he appears to have transformed. Given his nice, stylish apparel and the huge home he buys his family, the folks he grew up with now perceive him as a man of consequence. 230. As he becomes devoted to his art, his players, and the reputation he created in London, this comes at the cost of placing his job ahead of his family. Agnes is frigid towards him when he returns home after extended absences during which he was absorbed in the theatre and multiple extramarital affairs. She must wait for London, and all that he does there. to rub off on him before she can accept him as the guy she married. 276. When he creates a play about his kid, however, his London and Stratford lives become increasingly entwined, and Agnes is compelled to watch the event that unifies both parts of her husband's existence. Her spouse communicates his sadness about his kid and keeps the memory alive via the performance. Hamnet. At the time of his death, the novel's titular protagonist is an 11-year-old kid. His face is heart-shaped, his hair is corn-colored, and his eyes are flecked with gold. 14. Given his undone doublet and tuft of wild hair, he is prone to accidents, regularly falling and scraping his knees, and has a predisposition to scruffiness. Hamnet, like his father, is bright but a daydreamer, with a proclivity to slip the bonds of the real, tangible world around him and enter another world. 7. This tendency, by the way, connects him to the Hamlet of his father's play, who is a thinker and dreamer rather than a real man of action. Hamnet's widowed father provides his kid an opportunity to grow up and explore his creativity through the performance. While Hamnet and his father have a lot in common, he has a strong desire to be with his mother and his female twin, Judith. 166. Hamnet and Judith are so similar that they may be mistaken for each other, as Sebastian and Viola did in Shakespeare's later drama Twelfth Night. Judith is more than a buddy. She seems like such an integral part of Hamnet's life that he would be incomplete without her. 167. When he discovers she is sick, he tries all he can to cure her, even volunteering his life in return for hers. He feels that by changing clothing with his twin, he may deceive death as if the identity exchange were a joke. When he succeeds in swapping his life for Judith's, the text reveals that it is for two reasons: he already has a fever, and his request is supernaturally fulfilled. The relationship between Judith and Hamnet survives his death since Judith is the only family member who can successfully sense his presence, while others are troubled by his absence. Judith. Hamnet's twin, Judith, is a more delicate, feminine version of him. Judith is prone to illness despite being preternaturally beautiful with clear blue eyes and soft, celestial curls. 204. She was born with her umbilical cord wrapped around her neck and was not expected to live through infancy. Agnes' belief that she would only have 2 children, along with Judith's frailty, is at the foundation of the family's disintegration. Agnes and her children are at Stratford, where Judith is more likely to survive, while her husband is in London composing plays. Judith grows up to be a sensitive, timid youngster with a penchant for cats who is unafraid to be in Hamnet's shadow or to follow his lead in terms of the games they will play. After Hamnet's death, she expresses her grief fully, sobbing uncontrollably, even while people around her worry that she would harm her health. She will go to any length to have Hamlet visit her, even if that means following the midwife's superstition and waiting for him to flee. Only until Judith has lost Hamnet a second time can she understand that he is truly gone. Judith finds comfort in breeding and caring for her cats while she adjusts to Hamnet's passing. She makes certain that these misfit, semi-wild creatures, who were drowned because there were too many of them, find homes and receive the respect they deserve. As a result, left-handed Judith, who has shown little interest in learning to read, continues her mother's task of bringing the domestic and the savage together. Susanna. Susanna, Agnes' eldest child, and Latin instructor, shares her father's thick dark hair and is more practical than either of her twin siblings. 21. Susanna begins her life as a cheerful, curious infant who is close to her mother, but as she grows older, she becomes more obedient. She is in charge of keeping things going at the house on Henley Street and then at the huge mansion in Stratford. She is at her Grandma Mary's beck and calls on Henley Street, and she is tasked with responsibilities like buying fields for her father at the Stratford mansion. Susanna feels overworked and underappreciated in both households. She misses her absent parents in Henley Street, while she criticizes her grief-stricken mother's unkempt look, her sister's daydreaming eccentricity, and her father's plays, which are known for being extremely bawdy at the Stratford residence. 279. She wishes to get out of her weird family and is concerned about who will court her. Susanna's character symbolizes the sacrifices made by children for their parents. Her parents' desire for self-definition, she believes, has suffocated her opportunities. Joan. Joan, Agnes' stepmother, is the polar opposite of her mother Rowan, with wider, pale hair screwed up in a knot, hidden beneath a coif grimed by sweat, 44. Joan is Agnes's late father Richard's second and least favorite wife, even though she gave him 6 healthy children. She is distrustful of her beautiful, supernaturally endowed stepdaughter Agnes, thinking her to be the source of her problems. Joan, bitter and worn down by her husband's death with a lock of Rowan's hair in his pocket, opposes Agnes' marriage to the Latin instructor but has little authority to stop it. Joan, on the other hand, shows her rage and bitterness by relishing in the news of Agnes' tragedy. She is desperate to spread the news that Agnes's husband profited from their son's death by creating a play about him. Joan licks her lips as if tasting something good, something sweet on them when she learns that Agnes' husband hasn't written to her in a long time, 286. Joan's hostility is made humorously sad by this excessive detail. Her ill will toward Agnes, despite her lack of authority to exact retribution, reflects the constrained and wretched existence of the typical woman in the 16th century. Bartholomew. Rowan's second child and successor to his father's property is Agnes' brother Bartholomew. He's a large man with wide, surprised eyes and white star-shaped fingers, 44. He and Agnes are good friends who have a strong love for the land they work in. Although Bartholomew is a compassionate spirit, he exploits his enormous bulk to frighten the Latin instructor into taking excellent care of his sister. He frequently serves as a middleman to secure Agnes' family's happiness. Even though Bartholomew has a wife and family of his own, the book only mentions them briefly. Instead, O'Farrell portrays him as a grounded man who is a more stable counterpoint to Agnes's erratic spouse. John. John, the Latin tutor's father, is a glove dealer. He was formerly the village's most powerful man, but he was humiliated following secret dealings in the wool trade, 20. His relationship with his eldest son, whom he labeled a wastrel and compelled to work as a Latin instructor at Hewlands, is tense and violent at times. When the tale opens, Hamnet is 11 years old and lonely. Resentful John has turned to day drinking. To Hamnet, John is a terrifying figure, as he senses his grandfather's rage unsheath itself and stretch out from him, like a rapier in quest of an opponent, 12. When Hamnet finds himself in the wrong location at the wrong moment, John punches him in the face. He becomes that opponent. The bruise John puts on Hamnet's face is the first thing that makes him seem like a victim and foreshadows his eventual demise. Despite his antagonism, the reader learns that John liked his grandson and planned to hand over his firm to him. Mary. Mary, John's wife, is a mother of 8 who has lost 3 of her children. She is committed to her position as a mother, despite being a strict lady who drowns extra kittens and threatens to beat the twins if she believes they have ignored their responsibilities. She regrets her eldest son's departure for London and attempts to keep her daughter-in-law Agnes from giving birth. When Mary helps Agnes deliver her twins for the second time, the midwife sees that despite her own 8 children, despite her age, Mary wants to relive the sensations of maternity and take ownership of Agnes' twins, 196. While Mary first distrusts Agnes and regards her as the sorceress who bewitched and ensnared her boy, as the two work together at the twins' sickbeds, Mary comes to admire her, 174. Mary also looks after Agnes' kids when Agnes is too distraught to care for them herself. In this scene, O'Farrell demonstrates how, in times of crisis, women may put their differences aside and build happy communities. Eliza. Eliza, the Latin tutor's sister, was taught to read and write by him, which is amazing considering how few women were literate at the time. She was also her brother's confidant before his marriage, and she spent her childhood years with him and his sister, Anne, who died. Her brother still uses the attic where they used to play as a refuge from the household in adulthood, 60. Eliza, who admires Agnes and requests that she design her bridal crown, sympathizes with the quirky couple and their children but is more anchored in their community and family. Unlike her brother's secret wedding, she wants her wedding to be public, with her banns read loudly at the church door and audible to everyone she knows. 93. She marries a milliner, and the two of them take over Agnes and her children's apartment. The Manx Cabin Boy. In Chapter 11, the sandy-haired Manx cabin kid, who is likely just a few years older than Hamnet, acts as a foil for him. Despite living on a plague-infested ship and being at his captain's beck and call, the cabin kid exhibits childish fun similar to Hamnet's. He's a kind character who calls the monkey with the pestilent flea his new friend and cuddles up to the ship's many cats. 143. He pines for his home on the Isle of Man, as well as his native Manx mother tongue, which he must abandon in favor of English. The youngster, who visits half of the world's ports, is the ultimate victim of his circumstances. His situation is similar to that of Judith, who is unknowingly entangled in a web of interactions that leads to her illness. Despite this, the youngster miraculously avoids illness and returns to the Isle of Man with the remaining Venetian cat. The Manx child, like the player boy in Hamnet's father's play, becomes another Hamnet doppelganger who survives and grows up as Hamnet perishes. He, like Judith, comes dangerously near to death but manages to avoid it at the last moment. Themes. The change in the percentage of certainty and doubt. Agnes is the certain one who lives in certainty at the start of O'Farrell's tale, while her husband is adrift. However, as the story develops, she gets more skeptical, while he gains confidence and prestige. The loss of their son hastens this tendency, as Agnes fades into obscurity and her husband turns his emotions into Hamlet, his masterwork. Agnes inherited her mother's unique perception and healing talents as the daughter of a mythical woodland woman. She lives in peace with a kestrel, a wild bird of prey, and can discern a person's spirit by touching the muscle between their thumb and fingers when the Latin tutor meets her. Agnes' strong instincts lead her to a man who will allow her to be herself without trying to crush her individuality, as was common in marriages at the time. While her father and stepmother worry that her odd gift is unchristian and she grows up feeling wrong, Agnes' strong instincts lead her to a man who will allow her to be herself without trying to crush her individuality, as was common in marriages at the time. 49. Agnes gains a place in the town as a healer who rivals the physician, despite rumors about her witch-like abilities. As a result, she can balance her pagan skills with the expectations of a patriarchal Christian culture. She walks serenely through a world utterly transparent with her eerie awareness of ghosts, life expectancies, and the number of children she will birth. 189. Her foresight and conviction in her ability to read nature like a book allow her to live in certainties that provide her with confidence and peace of mind. 189. Agnes' unwillingness to accept ambiguity and the possibility of being incorrect drives her to become rigid, clouding her judgment. For example, her belief that she would only have 2 children causes her to disregard the fact that the size of her belly during her second pregnancy indicates that she may be carrying twins. While she felt safe and in control during her first labor, which was planned by her mother, she feels extremely uncomfortable and terrified during her second, which is staged by her mother-in-law and a midwife. She becomes deluded and disoriented as a result of her dread, and she raves about Mary and the midwife being the 2 individuals in her dying vision. 197. Agnes fights her foresight and pledges to do everything she can to secure the lives of all 3 children when she discovers she was mistaken about having 2. Agnes believes that fate created a trap for her by making her concentrate on the wrong child so that it could reach out, while she was distracted, and snatch the other when she discovers that hardy-appearing Hamnet is more susceptible to the disease than frail Judith. 208. She laments the loss of a benign, adaptable global order as she mourns Hamnet, as she struggles to negotiate life's volatility. Agnes comes to terms with her doubt towards the end of the story when she travels to London, wanting to learn more about the play that so scandalously holds her son's name. Her faith in the workings of the universe is restored in part because of her husband's surprisingly touching play. Agnes' husband, who, like his wife, grew up feeling out of place in a culture that valued practical abilities and commercial acumen above imagination, never shared Agnes' sense of confidence. Despite his immense essence, his father suffocates him in Stratford, and he has no outlet for his gifts. He is like a canvas thin, with nothing behind it. He is like a person whose soul has been sucked out of him or stolen away in the night. 154 to 155. This morbid image demonstrates how Agnes's husband's household life of stability and certainty eats away at him, making him mentally and physically ill. The idea that his soul was taken in the night means that his current living situation denies him what is properly his. Agnes recognizes this and makes the courageous decision to let her husband leave for London, even though her children would suffer as a result of his absence. Agnes's lack of trust in her second pregnancy originates in part from her husband's absence and the awareness that he had returned to himself. Better now that it's been restored. It was returned. 194. The series of one-word phrases suggests that Agnes' husband's spirit had returned and blossomed while he was gone from his family. Here, Farrell emphasizes that, like all great men, he had to pay a price for his unprecedented triumph. Agnes' husband lives in a climate of turbulence and uncertainty, preferring highly packed London to idyllic Stratford. His teammates become like family to him, and they keep him occupied while he is grieving. On a deeper level, he can transform his anguish and ponderousness about the world's uncertainties into compelling works of art. Even when his son's body is replaced by a shifting stream of actors, he offers a structure for his son's memory by creating the play that carries his son's name. Doubling, twins, and duplicity. The novel's core themes include twins, doubling, and deception. On a literal level, the story includes twins Hamnet and Judith, who are so similar that they are one person split down the middle or mirror images. 235. Agnes' failure to comprehend that she is carrying more than one kid expresses the concept that Hamnet and Judith might be two sides of the same person. When Hamnet devotes his life to Judith, he internalizes this myth, believing that perhaps there never was enough life for the two of them. 169. Both nature and patriarchal tradition favor the male twin Hamnet, who is double the size of his sickly sister Judith, at the time of their birth. This balance of nature and nurture is maintained throughout the twins' youth, as the tougher Hamnet is sent to school while Judith stays at home uneducated. By the time they are 11 years old, society has gendered the twins and has prepared them for lives that are vastly different. The prepubescent twins, on the other hand, nevertheless believe they are similar enough to exchange their gendered attire and masquerade as one another. They resemble the twins Viola and Sebastian from Shakespeare's 1602 drama Twelfth Night in this way. Despite his grandfather's desire to give over the glove-making company to him and what he may have been taught about male dominance, Hamnet loves his illiterate female twin's life more than his own. You shall stay, he assures her, they need you. 167. Personified death agrees with Hamnet, taking him instead and enabling Judith to enjoy a strange life of singing to herself and rearing cats. Hamnet, on the other hand, becomes a ghost who is reincarnated by a succession of players' boys. The male twin dies young and is resurrected in art while the female twin achieves adulthood. Judith's position of existing and then being forgotten in death is common of women, but Hamnet's immortalization is characteristic of a few lucky men. The topic of twins is used by Farrell to investigate the conflict between nature and nurture, as well as fate and the unexpected. On a more metaphorical level, all of the characters in the story are twins in the sense that they have a public aspect and a private, vulnerable side. For example, John, the twins' grandpa, puts on a severe and hostile demeanor while covertly drinking to cope with his social exclusion. In a patriarchal culture, his outward demeanor would be branded as masculine, but his concealed weakness would be categorized as feminine. The guy described interchangeably as the Latin instructor and Agnes' husband, but never given a single name, is the most twinned figure in the work. Because the name Shakespeare or simply William has the potential to captivate and provide the appearance of a fixed, famous personality, Farrell purposefully withholds it from the reader. Instead, the reader must see that Hamnet's father and Agnes' spouse have a fluid, twofold identity. His double existence begins in earnest when he relocates to London to pursue a career as a playwright, before returning to Stratford and resuming his family man position. When his twin son Hamnet dies, the London persona takes over and depletes the twin self who might be a devoted spouse and family guy. His London prosperity shapes the well-dressed man of significance who buys his family a spacious Stratford property. His twofold nature, on the other hand, lives on in a different form. When Agnes visits London, she discovers that her husband's quarters are as austere as a monk's cell. 293. How can the man who owns the largest house in Stratford, as well as a lot of lands, be living here, she wonders. 293. Despite his success, her spouse needs time to develop the contemplative, feminine half of his personality, the same side that his public persona relies on. In this case, the ostensibly weaker, the quieter sibling must thrive for the ostensibly stronger twin to survive. This parallels the conversation between Hamnet and Judith, who were both bold and gentle. Literate and illiterate spheres. A contradiction is at the core of O'Farrell's project. Her novel attracts readers' attention since it is based on the most renowned playwright in the English language and possibly his most famous literary masterpiece. Nonetheless, her story focuses on the lively, sensual lives of the illiterate. This bold choice reflects the fact that the great majority of people in Shakespeare's period were illiterate and without formal education. Boys from noble or rich middle-class families, such as the glove trader Johns, were formally granted schooling. They were taught Latin, the treasured language of ancient Roman poets and philosophers, in addition to English, the spoken language that would enable them to communicate in their daily lives. That study, particularly Latin study, is taken for granted in Hamnet's universe. For example, despite Hamnet's skill for syntax, rhetoric, and arithmetic, these subjects frequently appear less vivid than real-world happenings. A wagon passing by during a class, for example, will elicit wonderings as to where the cart might be going and what it might be carrying. 7. Similarly, his father, a Latin instructor, finds listening to boys ramble on about conjugations uninspiring. The benefit of being read is instead delayed until a time and place outside of the classroom. Those who can read and write may send letters, allowing their minds to travel where their bodies cannot. They play an essential role as message and record transmitters. Eliza and Susanna both accomplish this distinction because they are taught to read by the Latin teacher, a guy who understands the value of all individuals being able to express themselves in writing, regardless of gender. The spouse, a master of letters who has worked as a Latin instructor and a playwright, can preserve both his and his son's names in a way that the uneducated characters cannot. Despite this, the Stratford community ridicules and distrusts his literacy abilities since they are intangible and not immediately relevant in the town's economy. He'll have to go somewhere else to show how they can assist him to succeed. Interestingly, O'Farrell demonstrates how literacy and illiteracy are relative terms rather than black and white conceptions. Agnes reads painfully, her finger moving from word to word, her lips forming the sounds, and was taught to recognize the letter A by her father, who drew it in the dirt and declared it to be her letter, always hers. 55, 113. Because of her haphazard literacy, Agnes has a more visceral and individualized relationship with words and letters, which she perceives as physical and graphic rather than abstract signifiers. The triangle roof of her married home, for example, she considers to be another since the house slopes together at the top and has a floor across its middle. 114. This phrase enchants her new spouse since it demonstrates that Agnes sees the world like no one else. 114. Agnes' ability to perceive the world and letters in such a unique way is arguably due in part to her lack of formal schooling. Agnes, who is deeply entrenched in nature, does not see her lack of verbal literacy as a handicap. Rather, she likes learning to read and communicate with her bees and therapeutic plants. Judith, the couple's youngest daughter, is the only member of the family who is illiterate. Judith, who is left-handed, gets off to a bad start with letters when her sister Susanna attempts to educate her by forcing her to hold the pen in her right hand. Judith refuses to grasp the letters, to see how they merge into sense, and wonders if there could be a trace of something Hamnet wrote on this slate, she says after protesting that using her non-dominant hand felt improper. 278. This, combined with her practice of putting eyes and mouths in all the gaps in the letters, turning them into different creatures, demonstrates Judith's desire to familiarize herself with the letters, 278. She eventually determines that the world without letters is considerably richer for her than the world with letters, and she shifts her concentration to cat raising and plant cultivation. When Susanna protests, Agnes defends her youngest daughter, stating, "Judith's skills are different from yours, but they are skills just the same." 278. Illiterate Judith's abilities are perhaps intuitive, in contrast to the regularity and rigidity imposed by letters. Nonetheless, O'Farrell demonstrates how illiteracy confines women, particularly women of color, to the immediate worlds of the land and the home realm. They can only exist in the current instant because they cannot leave a record for posterity. O'Farrell chronicles and appreciates their sensory presence by centering her story on them. Symbols and motifs. The meeting. The novel's central motif is the unexpected meeting of two different items. There would have been no Hamnet and no evidence of the disease that killed him if such contacts had not taken place. This is emphasized by O'Farrell, who alternates the chronology of events leading up to Hamnet's illness and death with another chronological thread, which begins with his parents' meeting. Rather than entering into an arranged marriage, as was usual in the late 16th century, Agnes meets and falls in love with her Latin instructor by coincidence. While instructing her half-brothers, the Latin teacher notices Agnes from the window and assumes he'll have a casual affair with the mad witchy sister, 33. Instead, he inadvertently impregnates her. Their marriage, which is guaranteed by his father John to protect his interests, leads to a second pregnancy, which gives birth to Hamnet. Hamnet's personality is a mix of his parents, as he mixes his father's inventiveness and intelligence with his mother's curiosity and love of getting dirty. These paternal talents are unable to fully mature due to his unexpected early demise. As a result, his father and mother seek solace at the theater, where older boys may adopt Hamnet's name and demonstrate how the kid they created together has matured. Hamnet's destiny is sealed by a second encounter between the infected flea from the Alexandrian monkey and the Murano beads that arrive in Stratford. The flea bites Judith when the seamstress who ordered the beads lets her open them, and she passes the sickness on to Hamnet. The multiple interactions that led to the simple incident of a brother getting infected by his twin sister demonstrate that, while the characters feel they are in charge of their fate, happenings in a faraway time and place may change everything. The contrast of the omniscient narrative with the characters' ignorance of such remote happenings portrays the universe as vaster than even Agnes, with all her knowledge and insight, can comprehend. Agnes and Hamlet, the play her husband gives as a comfort for their son's death, meet for the final time in the novel. While she initially views the play as a vile phantasm, she eventually comes to embrace it as her husband's way of remembering their kid. 302. Medicine. In O'Farrell's novel, medicine, which includes both drugs and therapeutic techniques, serves as a representation of knowledge. Healers, whether Agnes, the physician, or the midwife, use the remedies and procedures that they are familiar with to heal their patients. Their medical procedures demonstrate their knowledge's creative potential as well as its limitations. When Hamnet discovers that Judith is ill, he contacts a distant and intimidating male physician. His treatments, like a dried toad rubbed to a plague patient's belly, are given because of their efficacy, not because he inspects the patient. 126. With his gigantic beak-shaped mask, he appears at the family's door appearing like a creature from a nightmare, from hell. 124. The physician appears to Hamnet as a death specter, and he believes that to be seen by his eye, to be noted or recorded by him would be a terrible omen. 125. The physician takes this portent into account when he sentences Judith to death and tells her family not to leave the home so that the disease does not spread. The physician, who professes to be a trained doctor, despises Agnes because she takes his patients, trespasses on his revenue, his work with her intuition and plant-based remedies. 125. Agnes brings patients into her house rather than treating them from afar. She bends her head to listen, gives a nod, a sympathetic click of the tongue, all of which are gestures of empathy, rather than wearing a mask. 52. She lets her gaze float upwards, to the ceiling, to the air, her eyes unfocused, half-closed, she says after holding their hand. 52. Agnes heals her patients with a combination of physical contact and intuition. She has faith in herself and nature, which she can read like a book. Her capacity to heal gives her confidence in delivery, which at the time was a significant cause of death for women. Thus, her first birthing, which occurs in the wilderness with the help of her mother's spirit, is relatively simple. Nevertheless, when her mother-in-law and the midwife intervene during her second childbirth, she feels out of control and as if she is about to die. Agnes reaches the boundaries of her knowledge here, and on a larger scale when a sickness obtained in a foreign nation infects her children's bodies. Her lack of faith in her remedies indicates a loss of self-trust when her medicine fails to rescue Hamnet. She must reclaim this before she can return to her true calling as a healer. Medicine, and the knowledge and intuition it symbolizes, is multiple practices among the women of Stratford, as Farrell demonstrates. Their different intuitions complement each other and balance out each other's flaws. For example, it is the midwife who intuits that Agnes will give birth to twins based on her expertise and experience. During her nocturnal rounds of the hamlet, the midwife also sees Hamnet's fleeing ghost. Another way Farrell creates the concept that knowledge and inspiration may take root in a variety of sources and bodies is through Hamnet's appearance to a near stranger who happens to be in the right location at the right time. Cats. Cats appear often in O'Farrell's work. Their independent-minded, half-wild attitude is reminiscent of Judith's maternal family, which includes Agnes and her mythical forest-dwelling grandmother, Rowan. Characters' attitudes regarding magic and unconventionality are often reflected in how they react to cats in the story. While everyone admires the cat's ability to catch mice, the more fun, quirky individuals find comfort and delight in the companionship of cats. When the kitchen cat on Henley Street gives birth to a litter of kittens, the issue of cats comes up for the first time. While Grandma Mary considers the kittens to be unnecessary mouths to feed and plans to drown them, the cat thwarted her, keeping her babies secret and safe. 10. Mary's desire to exterminate the kittens reflects her preference for a tidy home devoid of strange animals with no discernible function. Joan, another controlling, traditional housewife, is also afraid of cats, which makes her feel nervous. Judith, on the other hand, who stays at home while Hamnet is at school, finds the cats to be crucial to her happiness and keeps them near to her, keeping one in her apron pocket, a telltale bulge, a pair of peaked ears giving her away most of the time. 10. As Judith matures into a grieving young lady who is neither literate nor sociable after Hamnet's death, her interest in cats gives her confidence. She has a dynasty of cats that she spends hours grooming and speaking with through a language of crooning, high-pitched entreaties. 277. The cats, like Agnes and her plants, provide Judith with the caring she needs in a manner that no human can. Acting on behalf of the cats, whether by selling them as excellent mousers or explaining the many sorts, helps Judith come out of her shell and engage with the community. 277. The cat's importance in a matriarchal household led by Agnes exemplifies the family's unconventionality. Theirs is a home free of patriarchal standards, where wild and eccentric, rather than just utilitarian, beings are valued. Judith shares a love of cats and the skill to care for them with the Manx cabin boy who was aboard the ship that brought the plague to her. The Manx youngster lured a succession of cats onto the ship to kill the plague-ridden rats, as O'Farrell demonstrates. While most of the cats died at the end of the journey, he and a surviving Venetian cat make it to the Isle of Man together. The surviving cats, like Judith's pets, symbolize the triumph of unconventionality. The feline connection allows O'Farrell to create a sense of continuity between the far-flung encounters and coincidences that brought the plague to Stratford. Thank you for purchasing this audiobook. If you liked it, I would appreciate it if you leave a review. To purchase this book in ebook or paperback format, go to summarybooks.shop. Peter Cuomo.